Hello, everyone. It's nice to see a decent audience here. People are kind of signing in right now. So my name is Raja Krishnan. I'm a commercialization and licensing manager at the University of Kentucky Tech Transfer Office. So welcome to this first seminar in this kind of short course series on drug repurposing. And I'll try to keep this really brief here because I want to get to the main event. So we know that there is a lot of interesting drug repurposing research that's occurring in universities. And this is definitely of great value. At the same time, in order for companies to actually bring these products through the FDA approval process and available for patients in the market, there are a lot of considerations that need to be accounted for, such as, what's the intellectual property look like, the regulatory aspects, and also, the business considerations. In the end, it's really about a business justification and feasibility for these companies to feel incentivized to bring it to the market. And a goal of this short course is to give researchers insights into what's required, to best position these repurposed drugs so that things are done at a much earlier stage and considered, rather than finding out, further down when it's too late that certain things should have been done before. So today I'm happy to kick off this short course with our expert guest speaker, Gaby Longsworth, and she's going to talk to you today about the intellectual property side of drug repurposing. I connected with Gaby after I read an article that she and her company colleagues wrote about the topic of drug repurposing, and since then we've had some good conversations about it. So let me introduce her now. So Gaby is a director in Sterne Kessler's Biotechnology and Chemical Practice Group. She is the co-chair of the firm's diversity committee. She has been consistently recognized as a life sciences star by LMG Life Sciences since 2016. In 2017 and 2020, she was a finalist for Patent Strategy and Management Attorney of the Year in District of Columbia in LMG's annual Life Sciences Awards. And in 2019, Profiles in Diversity Journal listed her among their Women Worth Watching Award. Her specialty is in the fields of biotherapeutics, small molecules, biologics, immunotherapy, antibodies, microbiome-based technologies, synthetic biology, DNA, diagnostics, vaccines, viral vectors, and drug delivery. And finally, she earned her J.D. at Georgetown University and Ph.D. in human genetics and molecular biology at Johns Hopkins, and a B.S. in molecular biology from Florida Institute of Technology. So I don't want to take up too much more time. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Gaby, and I look forward to this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj. I'm so excited to be here. I'm really happy to see a good-sized audience. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'm very passionate about this area, and I do a lot of work in drug repurposing, pharmaceuticals, biotech, on the prep and process and strategic counseling side of things. So today's discussion is going to proceed along these lines. So why drug repurposing, a little bit about regulatory considerations. I know there will be a separate course on that, so I'm going to sort of breeze through that fairly quickly. Just a very quick primer on the FDA's Orange Book for those of you who don't know what that is, because I will be talking about that quite a bit. And then I think the meat of the talk today, the mini case studies showing you examples of actual new drug formulation and new use products and IP. And then at the end, sort of what should you be thinking about in terms of IP when you're interested in drug repurposing. And there should be at least 15 minutes of questions at the end, but if you have questions, feel free to I guess, put them in the chat window and we can try to answer them as we go along, if it makes sense. So why would you want to even repurpose a drug? Well, we all know that drug development de novo is extremely costly and time consuming. And you can see the numbers there. And this is not an exaggeration. This is really how expensive it is to put a new drug, a brand new drug on the market. So formulating, coming up with a new formulation of an existing drug or a new use for an existing drug is very attractive. And we typically talk about either reformulating, where we're doing a different formulation for the same active, the same pharmaceutical, or repositioning, where we're coming up with a new therapeutic use for a known drug. So I'll be talking about reformulating and repositioning, which fall under the umbrella of repurposing. And some new areas that you typically see are maybe drugs and claims in terms of IP for a new patient population, new indication, new dosage form, sometimes route of administration, or a new dosing regimen. So this is just very quickly in visual form. It takes on average 16 years to develop a brand new drug, and it takes on average about 5 years when you repurpose a drug. So you can see the attractiveness here. And of course, it's significantly less expensive as well. Now, in terms of the different types of drug applications with the FDA, there are 3 main types. If you're on the pharma side of things, this does not include biologics, which have their own, BLA and ABLA and much more complicated systems. So we're really only talking about small molecules today. There's the new drug application, which is the really expensive 1.3 billion, 16 years time frame kind of application. Then there's what we call a 505(b)(2) application, which is also referred to as a paper NDA. The 505(b)(2) just refers to the part of the statute that this comes from. But when you do this, it's a modification to an already approved drug. So this is where all of the drug repurposing that we're talking about is going to fall under the 505(b)(2) pathway. And the attractiveness here is that you don't have to do clinical studies from scratch. Typically, you can rely upon the studies that were conducted by the approval holder for the NDA. And sometimes you may have to do a few additional studies, but you don't have to do the full blown out clinical studies, which are extremely expensive. There's also the abbreviated new drug application, or ANDA. Litigators usually say ANDA, but the non-litigators say ANDA. And this is just a typical copy of the existing drug. This is when you go to the pharmacy and they give you a generic, it's an ANDA, typically. We're not going to be talking much at all about ANDAs today because we're really going to be focusing on the 505(b)(2) side of things. So here are just a few additional modifications that you typically see in a 505(b)(2). So sometimes if the prior approved drug is a salt, sometimes you can see a different salt form, different dosage form. Maybe the prior approved NDA was for a tablet. Now it's a patch or a sublingual or something like that, right? A capsule. Route of administration can be changed. The strength, maybe it was a 40 mg strength that was on the market, and now the 505(b)(2) is a 20 mg strength. New combination of existing drugs. Sometimes the active ingredient can be slightly modified. For example, you can have a deuterated form of a prior approved drug. That deuterated form would fall under 505(b)(2). And we talked about new indications, etc. And then I already sort of mentioned the ANDA. Some of these slides I'm going over really quickly because I know you'll probably get a copy of the presentation, so you can always go back and refer to some of the things that I'm skipping over. Okay, now exclusivities are super important because this is what gives you that market advantage. This gives you a purpose and a reason for doing all this, for repurposing a drug in the first place. Because if you don't have any exclusivity, then any competitor can just copy whatever you did and come on the market as well and sort of erode your market. So these exclusivities are put in place to provide an incentive for drug development. And it's something that's granted by the FDA as well as the patent office. Of course, once you get your patent, you get the 20 years of exclusivity where you can exclude others from making, using, or selling whatever you're claiming in your patent. And those patents can be listed in the FDA's so-called Orange Book. And I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. And you can get exclusivities based on your drug approval. So if it's a drug which is for a very small, there are very few people that would actually have the disease that's approved. I believe the number is 200,000 people or less. You can get orphan drug exclusivity, which is a 7-year exclusivity. So that means for 7 years after the drug is approved, the FDA cannot approve any other copy of this drug. So you have 7 years of exclusivity, which can be pretty substantial. New chemical exclusivity, NCE, that's 5 years. So if you have a brand new drug, you get typically 5 years of exclusivity for that. The other exclusivities refer to a new formulation, dosage form, new use, etc. You get 3 years. If there's pediatric population that this can be given to you, you get 6 months added to the patent expiration date. So it's not actually extending the patent, it's just a regulatory 6 months. So the FDA cannot approve an ANDA for 6 months after the patent expires. And then there's the Hatch-Waxman exclusivity, which goes to the ANDA side of things. Again, I'm not talking really about ANDAs today. I just wanted to make sure that you got the full range of exclusivities and we're aware of all these different types. Here's just a quick comparison chart showing 55B1, which is the NDA. That's, again, part of the statute where it falls under the 55B2 or the paper NDA, and then the ANDA just shows you all the different exclusivities in a handy chart. And then the advantages. So why is this a good idea to do a 55B2 instead of an ANDA? So first of all, we talked about the cost is going to be less than an NDA. And typically you can get around the NDA holders Orange Book patents, Orange Book listed patents, by having a 505B2 that is different than what they're claiming in those patents. So for example, if the NDA holder has a drug approved, which is an oral tablet, and they have several patents on this, the method of use, the formulation, method of making the formulation perhaps, and you are coming up now with a patch, and they're not claiming a patch in any of those patents, they're really only focused on oral administration, then you avoid all those Orange Book listed patents because you have a patch and they are claiming a tablet. So it avoids having to deal with these Orange Book listed patents, which can be a big deal and leads to a lot of litigation. You can still get the FDA exclusivity for 55B2 for orphan drugs. You can get your own patents when you file a 55B2. You can get your own patents on your patch, say, and you can list all of those patents in the Orange Book. So of course you will be now susceptible to generic attacking perhaps your product, but at least you can get your own IP and exclude others for at least 3 years. And you don't have to share exclusivity with other generics like you would have to do with an ANDA. And sometimes it is incredibly lucrative. These are just some examples of 505B2s that you can find. It's a little bit older, it's from 2017, but you can see the reference listed drug, that is the actual original NDA, like Treanda, Lantus, etc. And then the 505B2, which was either they changed the dosage form or they changed the formulation in some way, or it was a new combination. And you can see how much revenue some of these companies make with a 505B2. It can be quite valuable. So quick Orange Book primer for those of you who don't know what that is. So in 1984, when the Hatch-Waxman Act came about, there was a new requirement that the FDA had to make publicly available a list of all the approved drug products, including information about the patents. Not only the patents, but also the formulation, the dose, the company, and some other pieces of information. And this was, at the time, published in a hard copy book that had an orange cover. And that's why they called it the Orange Book. They now have the purple book, the red book. There's other books for different, like veterinary, biologics, et cetera, et cetera. But that name stuck, even though now it's only electronic, but we still call it the Orange Book. And it will provide incredibly useful information. I probably access the Orange Book every single day. That's how relevant this is and how important it is. And I wanted to quickly show you some screenshots so you can see what this looks like. So the link is at the top here. So hopefully when you get the slides, if you want to go here, that's the link at the top, excessdata.fda.gov, etc. And you can put in at just 3 characters of either the actual drug name that you're interested in or the active ingredient. You can search by applicant company, by dosage form, and by route of administration. And there's some other information below, like patent information, etc. Once you do that, and I think the example I have here is Abraxane. The active is paclitaxel. You could see all these different application numbers, the dosage form, the route. So the original company is Abraxis. And then you could see all these basically generics that have their own version now of paclitaxel. And it's an injectable, and you can see the dose. So if you were to do, say, a 3 mg per mil dose, and the only approved dose is a 6 mg per mil dose, that would be a 5,5B2. Versus the exact same dose, the exact same formulation, that would be an ANDA, right? Here's the information that you get when you click on the link for the NDA. You can see the vial, that it's for suspension, you can see the company, and then when you click on this patent exclusivity information link, it lists all the patents that the company has listed for this drug. So that gives you an idea of what's already protected, where there might be some wiggle room. So let's say you wanted to go for a 3 mg per mil dose, because the original approved dose is 6 mg per mil. Well, if you look at some of these patent claims, they may have a range already of 1 mg per mil to 10 mg per mil. And then, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. That's not really going to help you if you do that, because you can't get a patent on your dose. It's already covered. So it's just one consideration of when you want to do a 505(b)(2) and repurpose a drug. You have to know what's already out there before you put a whole lot of time and money into it. Because if you can't get your own IP, typically, you can't block anyone else. You'll get the 3 years exclusivity, but that's it. And sometimes it's good, but sometimes you're going to get beyond that, and that's where you have to be able to get some IP. So it's a very tricky thing to decide what to pursue, but there are lots of ways to do it. Okay, so that's a quick primer on all of that background. I don't know if there's any questions that came in at this point, or if I should just keep going.
Gaby, yeah, if there were a couple of questions, if you want to quickly answer it. I think that there was a question about the estimate of how much cost to bring a drug to the market. Question about whether, I think that number they gave of 1 billion or so, it's like an average out, right? So it includes like failures, and there was a question about that.
Yes, that's right. I think the average, like the true average, I think is around 800 million. So yes, it includes some failures and other things. It's just that the clinical trials are so incredibly expensive, because you got to do phase 1, phase 2, sometimes numerous phase 3s, and it depends on the indication and the dosage form. Some drugs are more difficult to make. They are more complicated to formulate. And if it's, let's say, glioblastoma or whatever indication you're going for, sometimes it's difficult to get the patients. You have to go all over the world. You've got to get a lot of clinicians involved. You can see how it can really add up, versus maybe a quick topical for, psoriasis or something like that. That's much simpler. It's going to be much less expensive. The FDA won't require as many studies as like an IV, which is always, yeah. So you're right. And then for a 505(b)(2), on average, I think the cost is around 200 million, 100 to 200 million. So significantly less. And then an ANDA is like 1 to 5 million, 1 to 10 million. So that's sort of how it breaks down.
So I think the other questions here really quick is about exclusivity. They're asking differences between exclusivity and patent life. And also, can you get multiple exclusivities, like for orphan drug and pediatric, and do they are they additive?
Exactly, yes. So the answer is yes, you can get multiple exclusivities. Some drugs get ODE, NCE, pediatric, and sometimes another 3 years for maybe they come up with a second use. So they layer all on top of each other. You can get multiple ODEs even. You can't get multiple NCEs, but you can have multiple ODEs. You can get multiple pediatric exclusivities for every use that you come up with after the original use. So you can imagine the more exclusivities you have, the better you can exclude others. This is the same. This is for NDAs and for 505(b)(2)s, not for ANDAs. And then the difference between the different exclusivities. So when we talk about the FDA exclusivities, we also call them data exclusivity. That's your ODE, your NCE, your pediatric, and all of those exclusivities, versus patent exclusivity, which are from the patent that you obtain at the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which is your 20 years. So you can see how they sort of overlap in a sense, but they're two different things, right? So you can list a patent in the Orange Book that expires, say, in 2030, but maybe your NCE expires in 2025. So they're first, before the FDA will actually approve your ANDA, in this case, you have to have a whole battle with the brand company to either win on the fact that your product does not infringe their patents, which can be difficult to do if it's an ANDA, because remember, an ANDA is a duplicate. It's an identical copy of the original drug. You have a better chance with a 505(b)(2). Or you have to prevail in courts showing that the patents that the company listed in the Orange Book are all invalid. And that's typically what happens. And that can take, litigation can take 4 to 5 years in district court, and then there's the appeal to the federal circuit. So when you see a drug on the market, a generic on the market, sometimes a whole battle went on behind the scenes that nobody's aware of.
So basically, Gaby, if I can add to that, so it's essentially like if there's market exclusivity, then no other products, that product you cannot have a generic. But once that expires, then there's opportunities, and there could be patent battles, and they could try to circumnavigate the patents.
Exactly. So what typically happens is with NCE, let's say there's a novel drug, you got 5 years of NCE exclusivity from the FDA. There is a provision in the statute that if you are coming up with an ANDA, a duplicate, to try to get a generic on the market, you can start the battle at year 4. You can file an ANDA application with the FDA on what we call NCE -1. So that's the 4th year after approval, which will start a whole process, including 30 days of a 30-month period where the FDA cannot approve anything. No ANDA will be approved in those 30 months, but it will start litigation where the generic tries to attack the patents that are listed, or say they don't infringe because they completely designed around the patent claims, etc. And if they prevail, after whatever time it takes, 7 years, 8 years, then you will now get the generic on the market. But during those first 4 years or first 5 years, the FDA cannot approve any competitors. So you have this golden period of exclusivity. The same with the ODE. If there was only ODE, you could actually start filing your application to try to get your generic approved, but the FDA will not approve it no matter what until the 7 years have expired.
One more thing. Can you just clarify for everyone the term ODE?
Oh, orphan drug exclusivity.
Okay.
We love these abbreviations, ODE. And I believe it's 200,000 people or less that actually have that condition. So it's not the most lucrative thing because, there's a lot of, the public does not like when, a drug is extremely expensive, like $100K a year per patient. But when when it's ODE, there's only 200,000 patients that have this. For the company to make any money at all, the drug will be really expensive, right? Because they have to recoup all these millions of dollars that they put into the development. So ODE can be good in terms of exclusivity, but it's such a small market. It's kind of this toss-up.
Sure. Okay. So that sounds good. So I think we've answered the questions for now. We'll let you get to the case studies.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so first case study. So I have two examples of drug reformulation, so new formulation, and one of a new use. So the first example is Mesalazine, and there's so many examples out there. I just tried to pick the ones that looked the most interesting. Mesalazine was originally approved as what's called Lialda, It's a Takeda drug, and it employed some sort of multi-matrix release technology, which they call MMX. And you can see that the active ingredient, the dose, and the dosage form are indicated in that table. It's the 1200 mg delayed release tablet. The FDA approved this back in 2007, I guess. I think there's a typo there. That should not be Allergan. That should be Takeda. And you can see the sales were fairly robust, almost $800 million. This data is as of 2016 or so. So then Allergan came along and thought, gee, this drug it has a huge market. How can we take advantage to come up with our own different version by reformulating? So what they did is they used slightly different technology called the multi-coat release technology, and they also came up with a different dose. So the dose is 800 mg, delayed release Mesalazine tablets. And they got approval a little bit later, and look at the amount of money they made on their reformulated, just a lower dose of the drug, $550 million, which they call Asacol. So what do the patents look like? So this is an example of Takeda's patent. There was only one patent listed in the Orange Book for Lialda. And this is what claim 1 looks like. So it's a controlled release, oral pharmaceutical composition containing this active mesalazine. And it is pretty particular, right? It has an inner lipophilic matrix with substances that are selected from this group. You know, one of these lipids or salts or esters, and then wherein the active is dispersed in the lipophilic matrix and in the hydrophilic matrix. That's just part A. And then part B of the claim, an outer hydrophilic matrix, etc., etc. And then optionally other excipients. And then there's a where-in clause at the end. The active ingredient is present in the amount of 80 to 95% by weight of the total. And the active is dispersed in both matrices. So looking at this claim from as a patent attorney, it's a fairly narrow claim, and the reason why it's fairly narrow is probably because there was a lot of prior art that Takeda had to get around to get this claim allowed. But what it also does, if none of this is super critical, it allows a competitor to design around the claim. You know, you can tweak, maybe you don't have a lipophilic and a hydrophilic matrix. Maybe you have a hydrophilic matrix, but it has none of the compounds that are listed here in part B. Same for part A. So it allows designing around, but if this is a fairly difficult molecule to formulate, and I don't know how difficult it is to work with, maybe this is one of the few ways that you can actually do it. So it really depends, but this is a fairly narrow claim, and this will be somewhat typical of some of these formulation type claims. Now let's look at a representative claim for Asacol, the 5,5B2 design around that Allergan came up with. They actually obtained 3 different patents that they listed in the Orange Book for their reformulated drug. And you can see as a representative claim here. So now they have, of course, the active, and then in part B, now they have an inner coating layer selected from the group consisting of, and then it has to be one of those compounds, and then an outer coating layer that has an enteric polymer or film coating material. They can't be the same, and then there's some additional parameters in that where-in clause. So they managed to come up with something different. They don't actually have the dose in this claim. It's in a dependent claim, the 800 mg dose. But they came up with a different technology, different strategy to come up with a controlled release tablet, and they got their own IP and ended up with $550 million. That's the first example. Any questions before I move on to the next example?
I think you can go ahead.
Okay, great. Next example is Venlafaxine. And Venlafaxine, it's originally sold, it's a Wyeth drug, it's sold as Effexor, which are immediate release tablets. It's an antidepressant, and it's used to treat major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. The immediate release tablets were different dosages, and it's actually venlafaxine hydrochloride, a specific salt. The tablets were between 12.5 and 100 mg, so multiple different types of tablets were available for Effexor. Approved in '93, so this is a really old example, and they made initially over $2 billion in 2001. Incredible. So then, I guess what typically happens, the patent estate starts to come to the end, of its life. The patents are about to expire. How can a company maintain its dominance in the marketplace? Well, one very popular strategy is reformulating the immediate release drug as an extended release. So they now came up with Effexor XR, extended release, venlafaxine hydrochloride, slightly different dosages, a little bit higher, 37.5 mg to 100 mg, extended release capsules. So this one actually, they filed it as an NDA. They didn't file it as a 505(b)(2). They filed it as a brand new drug application, got it in 1997, and made, again, a lot of money on this drug just by tweaking IR to ER, tablet to capsule, and then the dose. So this is, of course, it's all Wyeth, so any patents they had may have covered both of these formulations. We don't know. But, such a simple strategy, you would really have to do very careful analysis of the patents that are already out there to see if those patents already cover both IR and ER, different dosages, etc., before you would go and venture into making extended release versions of existing immediate release drugs. But a good strategy nonetheless. Here are some example claims. You could see at the top of the slide, I just mentioned that the ER formulation basically lengthened Wyeth's monopoly by another 9 years. Until 2017 when the patents expired. So they made billions and billions and billions of dollars by having this strategy, which is, fairly simple strategy going from IR to ER. And you can see some of the claims here. The first one, the 171 patent, usually we patent lawyers refer to the last 3 digits of a patent number. So the very first patent, the 171, it's to an extended release formulation of venlafaxine. And it has this capsule that has spheroids, particular percentages of drug by weight, microcrystalline cellulose by weight, and when the spheroids are coated with a film coating with ethyl cellulose and hydroxypropyl methyl cellulose. Again, this is a fairly narrow claim. Let's say you wanted to make a different extended release version of venlafaxine. You could get around this claim perhaps easily by not having microcrystalline cellulose. You have a different polymer. You may have spheroids that are coated with a different film coating. Not ethyl cellulose and HPMC, but just some different coating. That alone will get you already outside of this first patent. Again, formulation claims sometimes tend to be a little bit on the narrow side because, the patent office tries to not give you a claim that's hugely broad that would encompass, block the world of venlafaxine formulations. Method of treatment claims are typically not as narrow. So the second patent here is an example. It's a method for providing therapeutic blood plasma concentration over a 24-hour period. Basically oral administering this extended release formulation wherein you achieve this peak blood plasma level in 4 to 8 hours. That's pretty broad, and it's a good claim. It's kind of hard not to infringe that claim if you come up with a different extended release formulation, but it's not as narrow as the first patent claim. And then the third patent is a similar type of claim. Okay, any questions on that before I go to the last example?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll come back to questions at the end then.
Okay, great. Because this example is my favorite because it just seems so simple, and it's just it's really clever. So finasteride, which I'm sure everybody's familiar with, originally was approved as Proscar for BPH, benign prostatic hyperplasia in men with an enlarged prostate, and it's still being used for that purpose, even though it was approved back in 1992. And it's a 5 mg film-coated tablet, very simple. They made a lot of money. They're still making a lot of money on this drug, in the millions. So 5 years later, Merck came up with, hey, we got reports from patients who were taking this drug for BPH that their hair started growing. So they looked into that and realized that this drug, finasteride, can also be used for hair loss. So they filed another NDA. They filed an NDA because they could. Of course, another company could have filed a 505(b)(2) if they'd come up with this, called Propecia, which is the same finasteride in the same tablet, except the dose is now 1 mg instead of 5 mg. So technically, you could take your 5 mg tablet divided by 5 and have the same result, but they came up with a 1 mg tablet that was approved in '97 for Propecia, and that still is also making a ton of money still. And it actually made more money with Propecia than they made with Proscar initially. You could see those numbers there. So it's another example. If this is a completely new use, right? It's almost the same tablet formulation, just a different dose and a brand new use. They got brand new patents, brand new everything. A 505(b)(2) applicant could have done the exact same thing if they had this knowledge, this research, this insight, looking at the literature and say, hey, wait a minute, this thing can be used for hair loss. Let's get another tablet, reduce the dose and come up with this new use, get a 505(b)(2), get our own patents, and get in the Orange Book. So here's some examples of what the claims would look like for Proscar, the original use, and then Propecia. And you could see the first patent is basically reducing the risk of this acute urinary retention, which I guess is related to BPH, by administering 5-alpha-reductase. And you can see it's a method claim. They didn't have, I can't remember if there was a formulation patent as well, or if I just didn't want to show it because it was such a simple claim. They probably had a formulation patent as well, but they had the method patent, and the method patent is very powerful to block competitors, because if you want to come up with a generic version of this for the same use, you have to deal with this patent basically. And then for Propecia, you see a similar method of treatment patent, but now it's a method of treating male pattern baldness, orally administering the drug in this dose, and you see this nice dose range, at least until growth of hair can be detected in the balding area. And then a second method of use patent that they got, which is a method of treating androgenic alopecia. You can get all kinds of patents on the same thing just by slightly tweaking the use around, male pattern baldness. So these are some examples of that. And I guess now we're going to go into IP considerations. And I alluded to some of this as I went through the many case studies. So how would you go about even starting? Where would you even start? Let's say you have an idea for looking at existing drugs that are in a certain dose, and you just have a sense that, why don't we just make a smaller dose? The same drug, just do a 505(b)(2) smaller dose. Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, you really want to get your own patents to block competitors. If you don't, after 3 years, all that work and effort, because you typically get 3 years of exclusivity for this new dose from the FDA. Generics can already start copying your drug, and you have 3 years of life, and then, you lose any exclusivity you had if you don't have any patents to block competitors. So let's say you want to do that. So now that you want to look at, okay, the original patents that the brand company came up with, do they already claim this lower dose? Even though that lower dose is on the market, do they already have it protected? So that's where the freedom to operate comes in, which is basically a search of all patents by the approval holder and third parties that could cover the molecule of interest. And if you are going to, after that, you analyze those patents claims and you realize for whatever reason, it's not the best example, but it's the example I have, the simple example, for whatever reason they did not cover that lower dose. Okay, well, could it already be described in the prior art, what we call the prior art? Are there already publications, poster abstracts, blogs online? Was it already described as lower dose? Did someone already say, hey, why isn't there a lower dose of this drug? This drug has too many side effects, we need a lower dose. That's a problem, right? Why would you want to go spend all this time and effort when there's prior art directly on it, and it's going to be really difficult for you to get any IP on it? Maybe that's not the way to go. Or maybe there's a different path. Maybe it's a new use for the same drug, the same dose. You would do the exact same exercise. Is that new use already claimed in a patent? Just nobody pursued it, but it's already out there? Or is there already prior art? Is somebody already talk about this new use? Are there already hints that this may be another use for this drug? Because if you don't do either of these activities, especially the prior art search, when you file your own patent application, after you've decided that, hey, we want to work on this drug and repurpose it, if you don't know what's already out there that could block you, you're going to go, first of all, you're not going to be able to draft your patent application in such a way to already consider the prior art and ways to get around that. If you're being surprised with this prior art during prosecution, the examiner is citing all this prior art and that's the first time you hear of it, there's no way for you to get around it if you don't have anything in your specification of your patent application to get around it. You're pretty much stuck. Because you can't add anything new after you've already filed your patent application. You would have to file a new patent application, but then there may be new prior art that's going to block you. So it's a very strategic thing, and you have to weigh the pros and the cons and how much searching and all of this stuff when you decide to pursue this path and file a patent application. But if it's a novel dosage form, a novel formulation, then yes, it's patentable, as you could see with some of the examples that I gave you. The claims may be fairly narrow, and they may be easily designed around, but you probably will be able to get a patent on a very narrow formulation claim. And of course, you can always have a new combination. There's 2 prior approved drugs. You figure, hey, why don't we put them in the same dosage form? Doctors always give them together. You may be able to come up with a 505(b)(2) where you have both drugs in one combination. Okay. So a new indication is obviously patentable, as we saw with the Prostar versus Propecia example. And if there's truly nothing in the prior art that hints at this new use, maybe it was approved for cancer before and you want to use it for acne because you have data or evidence that this might actually work for acne, that's a new use that really wasn't foreseeable. And if there was nothing in the prior art that mentioned this possible hook, you can readily get a patent to that. Method of use claims, if it is to the actual approved use method for treating acne, you get approval for method of treating acne. That's really difficult to get around for a competitor, because unless they change it, come up with their own different use and file a 505(b)(2), they have to deal with your method claim. And method claims to a new use are certainly easier, I would say, to obtain than a claim to a new formulation, because there's so much, especially if it's an oral tablet, examiners tend to think that, okay, this drug was formulated this way in this oral tablet, and there's a patent to that, and that's known, and you come up with a new formulation of this drug, you reformulated it. But unless you can show why this is so special, and different, it's going to be difficult to get that panel out. You would have to come up with some sort of showing of why it's unexpected that it worked in this new formulation, or there was a real need. You know, maybe patients who took that oral tablet had difficulty swallowing. So you came up with a tablet that is sublingual, that, you know, you just put it under the tongue and it dissolves and nobody has to swallow anything. So you have at least a reason, a basis for why this was a long felt need or unexpected to come up with this sublingual formulation that people didn't think would work because the drug is difficult to formulate, or something like that. Otherwise, you know, you're going to have, typically for such a simple formulation, the examiners at the patent office will come up with all kinds of obviousness rejections, which is, they're basically saying, based on what was already known, your patent claim is obvious in view of these two references. You would have just put these together. There's just nothing new here, nothing inventive. So it's important to know that if you have something surprising or unexpected, different than what someone would have expected, then you stand a good chance of getting that panel out. And here's some examples of what these unexpected results could include, which I mentioned one before, but, you know, it's surprising that it worked for this new indication, or it's surprising that this drug works at this dose used, like a surprisingly low dose. I've seen these arguments all the time when I've looked at patents. You know, there's art, there's prior art, there are publications that say that this drug, the minimum effective dose is X, and you come up with something lower than that. Well, that's pretty good, right? Because everybody believed that you couldn't go lower, and you somehow came up with a lower dose that is effective. That is a great argument to convince an examiner at the patent office. Or a combination of drugs demonstrates synergy when used together. So when you use each drug alone, you get X result. When you put them together, wow, so you get 3X or 10X results. Completely unexpected that they somehow enhance each other's activity. Or the drug has a different mechanism of action for the new use and for the previous use. So all of these are examples of unexpected results, long-fail need, etc., that can help you overcome a rejection at the patent office for method of use and dosage forms. The simple example I gave you, where the prior drug is 5 mg and now you come up with a 1 mg tablet for the same use, that's going to be a tough one to get through, right? Because you just reduce the dose. What's so special about that? Unless you can show, hey, it's surprising that it works at this low dose. A drug that was previously approved for one type of cancer that now you want to go after for a different type of cancer, if those cancers are somehow similar, related, similar molecular mechanism or anything like that, the examiner's going to say it's obvious to go from this to that. So I know I'm throwing a lot at you, all the things that you need to think about, just starting from the beginning. Like, how do I even figure out which drug to repurpose? And do I do reformulation or repositioning? Then the IP that may already be there that blocks me, and all of this. It's a lot to think about, but you can see that the rewards can be huge. I mean, we're talking millions upon millions of dollars. So you can license the patent back. You can be your own, you know, pursue the drug and have your own estate. You can pursue it and then license it out at that point. There's a lot of upside, but there's a lot of analysis that goes on before that. However, if you are aware of all of these different factors, you've done your freedom to operate, you've done a prior art search, you know exactly where there's a window of opportunity, you have the patent application drafted accordingly, you can avoid and be aware, you know, be prepared for all these possible rejections and have sort of your strategy mapped out for how you're going to respond and get this really valuable IP, even if it's just one patent. Just to have something to list in the Orange Book or some patent that you can license to someone else that gives you, you know, the value that you really need. Otherwise, why would you want to go this route at all if there's no real value there? So with that, I'm going to stop there and answer any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So we got a couple of questions. I got one to me. So this person asks, when you're monitoring let's say for infringement and trying to enforce claims of things that are reformulation patents, doesn't seem to be as challenging, but what about enforcing method of use patents? Can you have any comments on that, or what the difference is and what your thoughts are?
Yes, certainly. So just a quick legal primer. So when you want to enforce a composition claim, like a tablet, the competitor, the generic, also has the same tablet. They're making that tablet, they're selling that tablet. You can demonstrate direct infringement of the generic competitor. So that's a fairly simple lawsuit in that sense that, yes, you made the tablet, you sell the tablet, you're infringing my patent, and I'm attacking you. Now, if it's a method of treatment patent, the generic company, I'm referring to the generic, right, because that's usually the typical scenario here, they don't actually treat anyone, right? They're making the drug, they're selling the drug, they're putting it on the market, but they're not actually treating anyone. So in that case, as the person, as the company, enforcing this patent, you have to demonstrate that they induced infringement of these method of treatment claims. They induced the doctor, they induced the patient, the hospital to infringe this patent. And how does the court determine that? They look at the product label. So in the US, every approved drug has a product insert, a product label. And if you're a generic, you have to copy that label verbatim, pretty much. You can change it a little bit around the edges, but in general, it has to be identical. So if the method of treatment is method of treating acne, the generic label says method of treating acne, that means the generic is telling doctors to infringe this patent because the label says treat acne with this drug. So that's very easy to show. There's a little gray area when the claim is not quite on point, because sometimes there's a disconnect between the patent lawyers and R&D, and the claims are kind of like wishy-washy, like the claim says method of treating, what would be a good example? Method of treating a particular type of cancer in a certain population of patients. And the generics, the actual approved use is a method of treating a somewhat similar cancer, but not the exact same cancer in people. So the generic may then try to argue, listen, I'm copying your label, but I'm not actually infringing your claim because I'm not directing, the label doesn't direct people to use the drug for that particular cancer that's approved. So sometimes there's the patent attorneys, the companies mess up, and they don't match the language in the claim to the approved use, and that gives the generic some wiggle room around a method of treatment claim. So where they could argue that there's no inducement of infringement. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that was good. So thank you very much. So hopefully we can get one or two more in here. There's a series of questions here in the chat window generally about, composition of matter, and we're not really getting around that. I mean, there's one question about that. There is another question about salt patents. There's a court case here, 2003, about reformulating salts to extend the lives. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, reformulating with a different salt is a great strategy, except most composition of matter patents claim the compound and a pharmaceutically acceptable salt thereof, almost always when you look at these patents. And then in some dependent claims, they spell out a whole laundry list of all the different salts. So unless you can come up with a completely different salt, which may not be in the mainstream, you may have a lot of back and forth with the FDA. You may have to do a lot of clinical studies to show that this unusual salt that you came up with worked. If you can do that, fantastic. You can get a 5.5(b)(2). You can get your own patents on this new salt. It has maybe new properties, but it's a little more challenging because salt patents are generally the PTO likes to declare them all obvious, prima facie obvious. Salt of a pre-existing compound or another salt. So you have to have some sort of unexpected results or something to show why this salt is amazing, you know, makes the drug be more stable or whatever it may be. But that is a good strategy.
Okay. One last question, because we're running out of time here, but is, you know, you see on the market sometimes there are, you mentioned talking about going on a lower dose than what's kind of in the patents. What if you see on the market that there are drugs at a couple different doses, but what you think is optimal is something in between, let's say in between two extreme doses? How do you approach something like that?
Yeah, like there's a 5 mg and a 10 mg, and you want to do 7.5 mg.
Yeah.
So
or it's a wider range, but
or
yes.
a wider range, yeah. 10 mg and 50 mg, you want to do 30 mg or something like that. Well, you first do your due diligence, right? You look at the estate that is already surrounding this drug. And I would say almost guaranteed they're going to either have claims that have the wide dosage range and dependent claims to all these different dosages. They may have only marketed the 2 doses, but it's probably already there, claimed. And if it's not claimed, it's probably in the background of the patent. So that will be prior art to you. Unless you can come up with a very specific formulation with this other dose that maybe has some other property that gets you around the almost certain obviousness rejection you're going to get from the patent office, that it's obvious to find a dose in between. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. Yeah, it's possible, but you're going to have to do more than just, oh, here's a tablet with a different dose. You may get that approved from the FDA, but if you can't get the patents, you know, you're just going to spend a lot of time and effort and several hundred million perhaps to get a different dose that you can't get patent protection for. And after 3 years, if it's something that is the market loves, you're going to have all this generic competition.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Gaby, for this presentation and answering those questions and highly valuable information. And thanks again for everybody attending. I dropped down to the chat. I'm going to have my own office hours if people have questions tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. If you guys want to stop by, you can stop by and chat with me. I can share with you what I know based on my industry experience. And yeah, I would enjoy that. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Gaby, and see you next time.
My pleasure. And everybody, if anyone has questions and wants to contact me, my contact information is here. I'm happy to answer questions.
And Gaby, as you said, we can share the slide deck, right?
Absolutely. You could share the slide deck.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay,
bye. Bye-bye.